Hello, and welcome back to Felony Spectator. I am your host, Heather. Today we're talking about a case that involved a pretty famous stripper, Marjorie Orbin. Well, famous for her time, I guess. I don't really know who is famous in the stripper world. It said she's been linked to movie stars, has been in music videos, and is friends with famous people. Marjorie was convicted of murdering her husband, Jay Orbin, after police found his dismembered body in the desert of Phoenix, Arizona. Let's get into it. Marjorie was born Marjorie Ann Crow on October 29, 1961 in Miami, Florida, to William and Janelle Crow. Her parents divorced by the time she was about 3, and her mother remarried Peter Garrett, who Marjorie called Dad. It said her biological father died shortly after the separation to Janelle, and it's also said he accidentally shot himself while cleaning a gun. I don't know if that's true. It was in the book Always Wanted, a true story of marriage and greed and murder. I've also read that her sister was named Allison, and other places I've read that her sister was named Colleen, so lots of misinformation out there. Marjorie's mom was said to be a kindergarten teacher and worked other part-time jobs to help pay for ballet and piano for Marjorie and her sister. Marjorie loved dancing. She grew up dancing and was trained in ballet, jazz, and tap. She wanted to be a professional dancer when she grew up, and Marjorie would later claim that dance was an escape from living in an unstable home. To me, it sounds like her mom was doing the best, but I wasn't there. Dance and piano also isn't cheap, but we'll continue. While in high school, Marjorie would get her first job as a hostess at a steakhouse, but continued to dance on weekends as well as a dinner theater called Once Upon a Stage. She did that for about 3 years, working waitressing jobs and dancing. One night when she was around 17, she met a man named Michael Marquis, 10 years older, but handsome and friendly. They would start dating. Around this time, Marjorie learned she had endometriosis, and it was so severe that her doctor informed her that she would never have kids. And this was crushing news for her, as she had always wanted to be a mother. Marjorie would later say that this news shaped the way she looked at life. She no longer made decisions for her future and instead jumped in with both feet, not caring what would happen. She wanted to have fun and live life. So when Mitchell Marquis said he wanted to move to Orlando, Marjorie went with him, just barely out of high school. While there, she took a job as a cocktail dancer at a place called the Church Street Station. This is located on Church Street in Orlando, and it's apparently a famous tourist area that has a line of bars and restaurants. I guess at the time it was 4 separate clubs, each with a different theme. A disco club, a Dixieland jazz club, a country bar, and a Southern opera house. Marjorie was a waitress at Cheyenne Saloon, but 5 or 6 times a night, the waitresses would stop what they were doing and perform a choreographed dance routine. Marjorie worked here for about 5 years, and while working, she would meet Michael J. Peter, aka Strip Club King. Google him. You'll see he's the original owner and inventor of the Gentlemen's Club. At the time Marjorie met him, he was changing the way these clubs operated. He had his bouncers wear tuxedos. He wanted his girls classy looking with manners, who were gorgeous. Everyone was to take etiquette lessons as well. And this was far different than most other strip clubs, and it was successful for him. Now, Michael J. Peter often went to Church Street Station to conduct business. And because he was so well known in the industry, only the best cocktail waitresses were assigned to his table. And Marjorie was apparently one of those waitresses. By this time, Marjorie had also been promoted to be one of the choreographers and was the manager of Cheyenne Saloon. Michael, Strip Club King, thought Marjorie was everything he looked for: a talented dancer, hardworking, beautiful, and they formed a really good friendship. Marjorie had also been married to Mitchell Marquis, so she wasn't interested in dating Michael J. Peter. Unfortunately for Marjorie, she would get divorced after only a year and a half. She thought she was still too young and still wanted to go out and have fun. Mitchell wasn't as interested in that. There was no hard feelings though, and Marjorie says that Mitchell actually bought her a new car and made sure she was financially stable before their split. Marjorie kept the name Marjorie Marquis, which she thought sounded classy and sophisticated. Marjorie would remarry, and her second husband brought her down to Las Vegas. He apparently had some business there there and was going to get a job. Meanwhile, Marjorie got a job as a showgirl at the Stardust Hotel, which she said she liked, but it didn't pay well. While in Vegas, her husband was having a hard time getting a job and suggested that Marjorie start stripping, which she said she declined. She was a dancer, not a stripper. So instead, they struggled while he was looking for employment. What she didn't know was that her husband had a gambling problem, and every dollar she was bringing home was going right back out again. When she finally realized this, she left, taking just her clothes and her unreliable car. On her way back to Florida, she passed through Phoenix and saw that the Bourbon Street Circus was hiring. So out of desperation, she got a job as a stripper, exactly what she did not want to do. Now, even though Marjorie didn't want to do this, she soon realized that this is where the money was at. She was making $850 a week at Cheyenne Saloon, but $500 a night at Bourbon Street Circus. So she stuck around. It would be here that she met Marjorie Orbin for the first time. I have also read that they met in high school, but I don't think that's right. Anyway, so Jay thought Marjorie was so beautiful. He gave her $100 just to sit down and have a chat with him and hang out. Now, she says she wasn't attracted to him. He was heavy-set, was starting to bald, and he wore a big rodeo belt buckle and a pinky ring, which just was not her style. She did, however, find him funny and charming and didn't mind sitting at his table talking. Marjorie Orbin was a pretty regular guy. He owned a successful business and stayed out of trouble. He was born September 8th, 1959 in Phoenix, Arizona, and the second son to Jake and Joanne Orbin. He was naturally a people person. He loved to talk and loved people, and this made him very successful at pretty much anything he did. After graduating high school, he worked for a landscaping company. He then worked as a horticulturalist and excelled, and then fell into a sales role, which he also excelled at. He also started his own business called Spectral Kinetics, selling novelty static electricity orbs to nightclubs and bars. These orbs were really unique and became quite popular, so his business did really well, until China started selling a cheaper version for a fraction of the cost. Jay had to quickly pivot his business, and he'd partner with his friend named Jim Rogers to sell Native American decor at local markets and craft sales. The two men would part ways, but Jim never had anything negative to say about Jay, even though they soon became competitors. Jay's new business, Jayhawk Trading, sold jewelry and native art, rugs, and dolls. He would set up booths at swap meets and fairs. His business became so successful that he no longer needed to sell at swap meets, and instead he went into being a wholesale dealer for manufacturers and retails, changing the name from Jayhawk Trader to Jayhawk International. Jayhawk International was a six-figure business, and it said that Jay ran his business honestly and respectfully, which is why people loved him and why he was so successful. As his business grew, Jay rented a large warehouse in Phoenix and bought a large cargo truck, which he drove on his business trips. Jay was said to be very meticulous with his business and personal life, following routines and lists. He was hardworking and, quote, hell of a nice guy, end quote, and modest too, never dressed to impress, just laid back and casual. Jay worked hard, but in his spare time, he liked to go to bars and meet new people. Jay soon became a regular at most of the Arizona clubs, strip clubs, and topless dancing clubs, sometimes going with friends, sometimes going alone. And Jay was naturally friends with the staff, so it wasn't unusual for him to pop in by himself for a quick drink and visit. Jay always had respect for the women there. He never took advantage of them, although he was known to date some of them. The girls would remember Jay as someone who would spoil his girls. He was very generous, buying his girlfriend expensive gifts. He often dated girls who were also down on their luck and needed help, and he didn't mind. He liked to take care of his women, but his relationships didn't always last long. In 1984, he bought a house in South Arizona with a pool and outdoor volleyball court. On weekends, he had friends and girls from the clubs over to have pool parties and barbecues. Unfortunately, Jay's generosity led him to be used by some of his girlfriends. But Jay never complained about it, as he loved his job and he was on the road, so commitment wasn't easy for him either. That was until 1985 when he met Marjorie Marquis at the Bourbon Street Circus. Jay paying for Marjorie's time became a regular occurrence. If he wasn't on a business trip, he was visiting her in the bar up to 4 nights a week. He soon asked her out on dates, and she eventually agreed, and they went to a park for a picnic. After this date, she still wasn't really interested in him, but she eventually agreed to a second date, which was lunch. Jay was a gentleman through the whole lunch and then offered her a room in his house. Not as a girlfriend, but just to save Marjorie some money. Marjorie had been living in a hotel, so living with Jay would really help her out, so she agreed. Jay was rarely there, he worked full-time, and went on his business trips often, but she was disappointed with his home. She assumed he was wealthy, but his house was small and boring, nothing special. She tried to make the best of it, but it really wasn't her style. Jay then asked her out again on another date and took her for a fancy dinner, which finally impressed Marjorie. It was romantic, expensive. He bought expensive bottles of wine. So the night would continue when they got home, but as soon as he took his clothes off, she was turned off again. They had sex, but to her, it was unremarkable. After that, she just wanted to leave Phoenix and go back to Florida. She told Jay she was leaving, and he begged her to stay, but she said no. He was a nice guy, but just not her type. And this was according to Marjorie. When she got back to Florida, she called Michael J. Peter, and he set her up with a job at the Doll House as a topless dancer. She rented an apartment in Fort Lauderdale, and here she was making even more money, closer to $1,000 a night. She was able to get new furniture, a new car, and her and Michael J. Peter became even better friends. Soon, her gambling addict ex-husband showed up apologizing and asking for her back. She took him back, and they got married again, but within a month, she was done. Marjorie left her apartment with him in it and all of her stuff. She just needed to be far away from him fast. It didn't take long before she met someone else, a handsome Italian who owned a tiling company, tough on the outside but soft on the inside. Less than 2 months from her divorce, she was married again, but lied on her marriage certificate saying it was her second marriage, not her third. Marjorie might not have been good at being married. Marjorie thought she was really good at her job. She claimed she was constantly getting promoted and making lots of money. She also bleached her hair from blonde to platinum, which became her signature look. According to Marjorie, she also starred in Motley Crue's Girls, Girls, Girls music video. However, I was not able to find her in it. She also says she was in a small movie role as well. So 2 years after her third marriage, she would get divorced from the Italian. For Marjorie, she thinks it just fizzled away. But she was more interested in her longtime friend, Michael J. Peter. Michael never wanted to settle down, though, or commit, so she dated someone else, a wealthy owner of an excavating company. She was 28, he was 56, but he had money. He owned several homes and collected vintage cars. He would fly Marjorie to lavish vacations and allowed her to drive his Ferrari. Marjorie would say he was funny, good-looking, and treated her well, but he primarily lived in New Jersey, and the long distance was hard. To solve this problem, she left her job with the Platinum Dolls and moved to New Jersey where they would get married. While in New Jersey, her new husband would sign over his excavating company into her name. She thought this was amazing. He must really, really love her if he wanted her to have his company. He changed the name from Marco Contracting to Marjorie's Company. Marjorie started to learn bookkeeping and really wanted to be active in this business. She then learned that there were taxes not being paid. Upwards of $50,000 was owed, but Marjorie did care. Marjorie confronted him and they got into a big argument. Afterwards, he left to one of his other homes. Now, Marjorie knew there was something shady about his company, so she packed up her 1988 Ford Bronco and left. When she filed for divorce, she wrote all assets to be transferred back to Marco Contracting. Unfortunately, Marjorie had sent all sorts of documents to the IRS prior to the divorce, and a tax lien was placed in her name. Again, this is something she told in her words, so we don't really know the full extent of why she owed $50,000. Marjorie went back to Michael J. Peter and was given her job back with the Platinum Dolls. Michael also offered a place for her to stay in his mansion, and they started a romantic relationship. Michael was featured on The Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and I guess Marjorie was in the episode draped over his arm. They used to go on lavish holidays, they partied in his massive yacht, and lived in a very huge mansion. In 1991, Michael proposed to Marjorie, and Marjorie said yes. But while engaged, she suddenly became a jealous fiancé. His work as one of the most successful strip club owners made her very insecure. Marjorie assumed he was purposely flaunting women in her face to make her jealous, so they broke up. Marjorie and Michael continued to remain good friends, and she continued to work with the Platinum Dolls as well. Marjorie's sixth marriage was when she was 31, and it was a fellow male dancer and longtime friend. They married just a few months after her and Michael ended their relationship. He was an openly gay man from Denmark who Marjorie would later say she married to help him get a green card. After that divorce, she tried to keep dating, but her relationship with the famous Michael J. Peters scared men away, so she picked up and moved to Las Vegas to be a showgirl. Marjorie would get dressed up in these huge, heavy feather headdresses and dance on stage for a few years until 1994, when Jay Orbin reached out to her after he saw her on a billboard advertising Paradise Dancers with Marjorie's face on it. It had been 10 years since they saw each other last, so she agreed to go out for dinner. Marjorie, now in her 30s, thought Jay was a really nice change from the men she'd been dating in Las Vegas. She loved the normality. She loved that he didn't want to party. He was a refreshing change. They would start to date long distance, and when she went to his home in Phoenix, she was happy to see that it wasn't the old house he used to live in. He was now in a suburban middle-class neighborhood in a nice new home. Now, Jay proposed pretty early on, but apparently Marjorie said no. She wasn't ready. She loved Jay, but wasn't in love with Jay. It said that he admitted to her that he had loved her from the first day they met, and the past 10 years he was searching for her. She then revealed that he probably wouldn't want her because she couldn't have children, and Jay promised to do anything and everything he could to help her get a child. He would spare no expense when it came to fertility treatments. Marjorie said she couldn't refuse, but according to her, she put a caveat on the deal. If after 2 years she still couldn't get pregnant, then she was going to leave. No hard feelings, and according to Marjorie, Jay agreed to those terms. So on July 22nd, 1995, they eloped at the Little White Chapel in Las Vegas. Marjorie has since said that Jay's parents never really approved of Marjorie. Jay's parents have only said that they were sad that their son eloped and married a woman who they didn't even know. She also looked like she just walked off a Vegas stage in her short skirts and high heels. But they tried to give her a chance, and Joanne has said that Marjorie was a very jealous person and was even jealous if he accommodated his own mother in any way. It's also said that Marjorie lied a lot. She lied about how many times she'd been married. She told them she married a man who died in a car accident, which wasn't true. She said she was also in the accident and was in a coma for weeks. That was all a lie. She lied about how many siblings she had. She said she was from a huge estranged family and her father was dead, and she was raised by her grandparents. She told them she had 9 siblings and had a twin brother living in South Africa. There was also a second set of sibling twins who performed with Siegfried and Roy and the Moulin Rouge in Paris. Again, all stories were untrue. Marjorie's only sister once visited, who was a heavyset truck driver from Texas. When her sister left, Marjorie then said her sister's husband died in a car accident and her sister got remarried. But it was a platonic relationship and she was actually involved in a lesbian relationship with a woman who lived with them. After the wedding, Jay also started spending less and less time with his friends. Jay was a super social person, so this was really odd for everyone, but it was Marjorie that wanted to have him at home. She had no interest in his friends, but she also didn't want him to see them either. His friends thought she was too controlling and too over the top, but Jay kept his promise and wanted to help Marjorie get pregnant. So Marjorie went through many surgeries, had hormone injections, and battled depression while trying to conceive. Jay comforted her and tried to make her comfortable. He rearranged his business travel for doctor's appointments and did everything he could to fulfill Marjorie's dream of becoming a mom. In 1995, Marjorie was finally pregnant and they'd have their son August 26, 1996. Jay's business was still doing amazing, but it meant 2 weeks out of the month on the road traveling for his job. Being away so much was getting to Jay, so he changed his business from wholesale to retail and opened a space in a strip mall in Phoenix, selling items he once sold as wholesale. This didn't last long, sales weren't great, so Jay had to go back on the road and switched back to wholesale. But while he still had the lease for the retail shop, Joanne, his mother, would help out. Now, Marjorie was happy now that she was a mother, and the Orbins were happy that they were grandparents, but life together wasn't easy. Jay would bring Noah, their son, over every Sunday for brunch, and Marjorie rarely joined. She refused to allow Noah to go to Easter dinner at the Orbins or do any Easter egg hunts because it was a religious holiday and Marjorie didn't believe in religion. Noah was never allowed to stay overnight, and she was very, very protective of him. One day in 1996, while Marjorie was out shopping, her bank account was seized. She was then forced to tell Jay of this massive $50,000 debt from a previous ex-husband. Jay wasn't upset. Instead, he decided to put everything in his name, all of their assets, so that nothing else would be seized. Marjorie was set up with a basic bank account where he would transfer $500 a week into, and if she needed more money, all she had to do was ask. And this suited them fine for the time being. Marjorie would claim that they were living a great life. She often helped Jay out with Jayhawk and started her own business installing hair extensions and doing nails. She also said that Michael J. Peter would still phone her about once a year and ask that she come back to Florida to be with him, which she said she declined each time. Even though Jay had to travel a lot for his business, he had a really good relationship with Noah. And Noah absolutely idolized his father. Marjorie, on the other hand, while she appreciated what Jay did for her, they had zero romance. According to her, they weren't intimate, which led her to look outside of her marriage. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Friends would also later say that Marjorie was quite manipulative. She could be kind and generous, but she could also turn around and be conniving and deceitful behind your back. One time when her son was competing in karate, she put itching powder in the opponent's uniform so Noah would win the competition. In another instance, a mom's child was complimented on his karate ability, and Marjorie became extremely jealous and obsessed with her. She wanted to know where she worked, where she lived, what she did, and where she went after karate. This mom would start getting phone calls from Marjorie's number, but when she answered, Marjorie would hang up. Marjorie also started to spread numerous lies about this mom. She became very vindictive, all over a compliment that her son got in karate. Now, she did make friends with other moms at the karate studio, one named Sharon, although that name could have been changed. Marjorie told Sharon that she had an advanced degree in law and psychology and that she could speak several languages. She went on to say that she had a few sisters, but no brothers, which was quite different with what she told her mother-in-law. She also told her that Jay was sterile and that there was very little of Jay in Noah. Sharon also noticed how very protective Marjorie was with Noah. Nobody was allowed to help Noah do anything but her. Marjorie would also go into the men's room if Noah had to go to the bathroom. He was never allowed sleepovers with his friends either. In 2002, Jay bought a new home in an upscale neighborhood in Northeast Phoenix. There was a backyard pool and a grassy area for Noah to play, and Marjorie said they were happy there, although she was never friendly with the neighbors. And the only time she did talk, she was saying something rude about Jay. For example, one time during Halloween, while out trick-or-treating, a neighbor asked, "Where was Jay?" And she replied that he couldn't walk because he was obese, which was far from the truth. And his weight was something that Marjorie was obsessed with, as her own weight. She was very devoted to the gym and her weight. She worked out every day and would prepare the same meal over and over every day to stay in shape. Marjorie told her friend that she started taking her son Noah's Ritalin, which really boosted her workouts and made her lose weight faster. With her new body, she was looking for someone new. Strangely, she decided that James Riley, a 19-year-old karate instructor at her son's studio, would be a good choice. He was also the boyfriend of one of her mom's friends from the karate studio. The affair started when Marjorie invited James over to her house to help him do alterations on his uniform. While there, she was very flirtatious and whispered something sexually explicit into his ear. And this is when the affair started, allegedly. And this affair lasted months. But James preferred his girlfriend and wanted to spend less time with Marjorie and more time with the one he actually loved. So one day, James informed Marjorie that he was over the affair and didn't want to see her anymore. Marjorie lost her temper and started to scream at him. She then threatened to tell his girlfriend what they were doing. I guess Marjorie ended up telling him that his girlfriend was cheating on him, and James was upset by this and told his girlfriend what Marjorie had said. They both knew it wasn't true, and they were very disturbed by Marjorie's behavior. So James and his girlfriend cut off their relationship with Marjorie completely when they realized her true colors. It didn't end there. Marjorie called the owner of the karate studio and James's father, telling them he was a cheater and that he had slept with her. She then started to call his girlfriend at work 10 to 20 times a day, leaving messages about having sex with James. Then in the summer of 2004, she had another affair, this time with Larry Weinberg. Larry was a 60-year-old divorced father of 2 grown adult children and had 2 grandchildren. Marjorie would approach him at the fitness center she went to and lied to Larry, telling him that she was divorced for nearly 7 years. But she wore her wedding ring to keep the men away. Now, Larry was flattered that this young blonde woman was hitting on him, so he took her out for dinner. Over dinner, she said she still lived with her ex, but it was a special arrangement. Her ex worked half of the year out of the home, but when he came home, he'd sleep on the couch or the warehouse where he worked. She told Larry her ex gave her an allowance to stick around and raise their kid. She went on to say that Noah wasn't his, but her ex didn't know that, and she used a sperm donor, which was a lie. But Larry believed every word, and their relationship went very serious very quickly. When Larry visited the Orbin home for the first time, he realized that perhaps Jay wasn't as absent as she implied. Jay's clothes were still all hanging in the closet. His possessions were all over the house, and it didn't seem like they were divorced and living apart. Marjorie assured Larry that he was moving out and speaking to a realtor finding a place soon. She went on to say that Jay agreed to let Marjorie keep the house as to not disrupt Noah, but he still kept all of his stuff there. Again, Larry believed her, and soon he took Marjorie and Noah to meet his daughter and grandsons. His grandsons were about Noah's age, so everything worked out really well on his end. They talked about their future and how excited they were about Jay moving out, although it was taking a really long time for him to find a place. Months, in fact, passed, with him still living in the home. On August 27th, according to Marjorie, Jay left for work for a scheduled 3 weeks away. He drove the green Bronco to the warehouse and transferred his belongings into the white cargo van, which was already ready to go with all sorts of items he sold. He also carried a .38 caliber pistol with him inside a well-worn Louis Vuitton briefcase. Apparently, wholesale jewelry wasn't a safe business, so he carried this for his protection. Now, over in Florida, a huge storm was brewing, later called Hurricane Francis. This storm would clock 145 miles per hour winds and tore the roofs off homes. So on September 3rd, Jay decided to turn around and go home as businesses were shut down and it wasn't safe. He called Marjorie and told her the news. Now, even though Jay was coming home, Marjorie continued to play house with Larry. During this time, she'd also have his daughter babysit Noah so they could go on romantic dinners or see movies. Jay would arrive in Tucson on September 7th, but stayed in a hotel because it was too late to come home. His plan was to get up early and be home by the afternoon the following day. This was also his 45th birthday, and he was excited to spend the day with Noah. So he called Marjorie and told her that he was going to come home for 2 days and then go back out on the road and finish his business trip. Marjorie, however, told him to stay away because they had come down with strep throat. She didn't want him to get sick before heading back out on the road. According to Marjorie, he let her know that he would go to the warehouse instead to check some emails and do some work there before heading back out on the road. Then, on the 8th, Jay's brother Jake Jr. called and wished him a happy birthday. At 8:30 a.m., his mom also called him to wish him a happy birthday. He then stopped at a gas station a few miles from his home, but sometime after 5 p.m., Jay was gone. Marjorie called Noah in sick from school on September 9th, even though he wasn't sick and they didn't have strep throat. Instead, they went to Target and bought a lot of cleaning supplies. Boxers for Larry, and a Nintendo Game Boy for Noah. A total of $482.31, almost her entire weekly budget. It didn't affect her though because she had used one of Jay's credit cards. The next day she went to Lowe's and bought some hardware supplies. She shampooed the carpets and cleaned the house. On the weekend, she cleaned out the garage and epoxied the entire garage floor. Larry came over and helped her move some boxes, and they installed a security system outside the front porch. Marjorie continued to spend money the following week on home decor, sheets, an elaborate water fountain, clothes, lingerie, and more home improvement supplies. September 15th, she bought a small ramp, paint, caulking, and drywall tools. 2 days later, she bought a new washing machine and spent hundreds of dollars from Pier 1 Imports. Over the course of 6 days, she spent over $6,500, all on Jay's credit cards. Larry also slept over every night and started leaving his clothes in Marjorie's house, something he'd never done before. People started calling the house looking for Jay. His friends, business associates, and Marjorie told everyone that he hadn't come home yet and he was still on the road for another week or so. Marjorie then left a voicemail on Jay's cell phone on September 14th, asking him to call her. During this time, Marjorie and Larry would continue to visit his daughter. One time when his daughter came out to meet them outside, she noticed it was just Marjorie and Noah in the driveway, so she asked where her dad was. Marjorie said Larry went out back, so she went back to look for him. His daughter noticed that Larry was dumping several large black trash bags into the alley dumpster, which was strange, but she didn't give it much thought at the time. Noah soon started to also ask for his dad more and more because Jay always called and spoke with his son while on the road. Marjorie would just tell him to be patient and he'd call when he could. All the while, she was packing away Jay's belongings in boxes and Larry was basically living there. Jay's family and friends were also calling more often, wondering where Jay was. His cell phone was going straight to voicemail and everyone was really concerned. Marjorie told his brother it would be just a couple more days, but orders were piling up at the warehouse and Marjorie wasn't keeping up with shipment. She would tell his clients he would be home on the 20th, but when the 20th rolled around, Jay still wasn't answering his phone. Strangely, one of Jay's friends got a phone call from Jay's cell phone on the 20th. He answered excitedly to speak to his friend that he hadn't spoke to wish a happy birthday, but all he heard was Rush Limbaugh in the background. The call disconnected and the phone once again turned off. Another friend also had a missed call from Jay, and when he called back, no answer. A client in New Mexico got a call, but when they answered, they heard nothing. 5 other people also reported calls, but not a single person actually heard Jay's voice. That same night, after Noah started crying and begging to speak to his dad, Marjorie called Jay's phone. Noah was saying, "Hi, Dad," into the phone when Marjorie took the phone out of his hand and spoke into the phone herself, saying, "Hello? Hello? Noah's been trying to talk to you and your mother's been calling." And then she hung up and said nobody was there. Marjorie then told Noah that she had a feeling he wasn't coming back and that something horrible must have happened to him. He could have been hurt really badly by very bad people. Now remember, he did carry a gun and the jewelry business was said to be dangerous. So she was trying to make it seem like that's what happened to him. Marjorie continued to rack up Jay's credit cards and continued to lie to his family, saying she didn't know where he was. But when she told his brother that she informed Noah he might not come home and all about these bad people in the world, his brother realized something much bigger was going on. That same day, Marjorie finally called the police to file a missing persons report. Jake Jr., Jay's older brother, went over to the Orbins' home to speak with Marjorie. He asked for a client list so he could see who was the last person that Jay had spoken to. Marjorie said it was at the warehouse, but she's just been too busy to go there. Now, Jake Jr. wouldn't understand why wouldn't she check the warehouse this entire time? Maybe he was there. Marjorie never seemed frantic or worried about Jay being missing. And everybody noticed that, including the police. Now, of course, Jay wasn't in the warehouse when Marjorie went to look for Jay. While there, she had Larry dismantle Jay's desk to bring home. Jay's cargo van was still at the warehouse, still filled with his belongings. It was the Bronco that was missing, but Marjorie didn't report the Bronco missing. Jake Jr. would also remember back at the home that he saw Jay's life insurance documents out on the table. He thought this was strange. Why was Marjorie acting like he was already dead? So Jake Jr. took Noah to pick up some takeout for dinner, and Noah revealed that he did in fact speak with his dad 2 times during the last few weeks, which was surprising to Jake Jr. Noah went on to say that his dad sounded weird, and his dad said the exact same thing in both conversations, which was, "Good. Well, you take care. I'll talk to you later," and hung up. Noah thought it sounded like a recording. While Jake Jr. and the Orbins were sick with worry, going through a client list of over 2,000 people, Marjorie was off living her life. She went out to concerts with Larry's and many fancy dinners. When Larry's grandson celebrated his 6th birthday, Marjorie surprised him with a rented pony. And Larry's daughter thought this was very unusual and wondered where she got the money. On September 27th, Jay's family insisted that they wanted to see the warehouse. to see if Jay left any clues behind. Coincidentally, the police called and they also wanted to see the warehouse, so they all went down at the same time to see if there was anything that could lead them to Jay. The phone and the computers were already removed, filing cabinets were already emptied, Jay's worn-out brown Louis Vuitton briefcase that he took everywhere was also there, empty. No gun in sight. Without really knowing what was going on and trying not to think the worst, people wondered if Jay was in a car accident somewhere and hadn't been found. Family were calling hospitals all over the country, something Marjorie didn't do. Marjorie started to become irritated by his friends and family when they called for updates. She also changed the greeting on the answering machine to indicate she'd only call back if the missing person's status changed. Marjorie then got angry that Jay's mother was calling his clients looking for Jay. His clients stopped paying and stopped ordering because they learned he was missing, and she wanted Joanne to stop calling immediately. And it seemed as though it was the money that was more important to her than finding her husband. The Bronco that Jay had apparently drove often before disappearing was seen in 2 different neighborhoods. On September 19th, it was parked for days and an abandoned sticker was placed on it. Then suddenly it moved and showed up on September 25th in a different neighborhood. Witnesses in both those neighborhoods described a tall, skinny blonde to be the driver of the Bronco. When police confronted Marjorie about lies she told the family and lies she told them, she became very angry and very defensive. Police asked her to take a polygraph test and she scoffed at them. They asked her several times if they could come and search the home, and Mary had an excuse after excuse as to why they couldn't. She was always busy. Police then got a warrant because everything was pointing to her. A group of officers were sent out to execute the warrant, and Larry happened to be there and immediately started to yell and tell everyone to get the fuck out. Larry was told to get on the ground, and when he didn't listen, he was shot with a taser gun and forced to the ground. Larry continued to resist and was tased a second time. Officers had to hold his head down on the ground, which started bleeding all over the front entranceway. This is when police were able to confirm Marjorie's extramarital affair. Marjorie claimed that her and Jay were not even married. Apparently, because of the $50,000 lien on Marjorie, it was suggested by a lawyer that they divorce so that the debt wouldn't affect Jay's business. So on paper, they weren't married. They were divorced, but they lived like a married couple and raised their son as a married couple. The plan was that they'd eventually get remarried with a prenup, but that just never happened because they never got around to it. Unfortunately for Marjorie, that meant if she ever left Jay, she wouldn't be entitled to anything. She would only be entitled to child support because all the assets were solely in Jay's name. Marjorie was, however, his primary beneficiary if he died. And that was a secret to everyone. When police searched the home, they took bank statements, paperwork, life insurance policies, cell phones, computers, and everything Marjorie took from the warehouse. They also took note that Larry had already basically moved in. Marjorie continued to play dumb and say she had no idea where Jay was. Then, on October 23rd, 45 days after Jay went missing, Jay's torso would be found in the desert. A transient who was living in a construction site had walked through the desert on the way back from a gas station where he bought a 6-pack of beer. While in the desert, he noticed a mattress and sat down to have a cigarette. While sitting there, he noticed a large tub, and around the tub was carpet. Out of curiosity, he unwrapped the carpet from the tub, cut the tape off that was heavily wrapped around the tub, and opened it. Inside, he'd see black trash bags and plastic sheeting, which he started to pull apart. The stench of what was inside hit him hard, right when he realized what he was looking at. It was a belly of a human. He saw a belt buckle, jeans, and the hairy torso of a man. He ran right back to the gas station and called 911. The coroner doing the autopsy received the bins in their entirety, so he had to unpack and discover what was exactly inside. In doing so, he would find a spent .38 caliber bullet. Remember, Jay owned a .38 caliber pistol, which was seemingly missing. There was $459 in the victim's pocket, a small bottle of Contax lens solution, and a keyring with 11 keys. He also discovered that the body had once been frozen before being thawed and cut up with an electrical saw. The victim seemed to be a white man in his 40s. The tub appeared to be fairly new as well, as the UPC sticker was still on the tub, which later linked back to where the tub had been purchased. Luckily for police, they didn't have to wait long for DNA results to identify who this man could possibly be. Coincidentally, another detective at the station was working on his own missing persons investigation. A male, 45 years old, an art dealer named J. Michael Orbin. His wife Marjorie had been the one to report Jay missing, but her behavior was unusual given the circumstances. What he knew at the time was Marjorie had been selling Jay's assets, going on shopping sprees, and she bought a grand piano, electronics, new furniture, and loads of new clothes. It's also said that she had been having an affair with a 60-year-old bodybuilder named Larry Weisenberg. Jay's Bronco had recently been located in the parking lot of an apartment complex that had zero ties to Jay or Marjorie. The Bronco was impounded, so the detectives took the key ring of the John Doe, and out of curiosity, they tried to use them on the Bronco. Shockingly, the keys started the Bronco on the first try. So October 28th, another warrant was issued, and this time a SWAT team was sent out to Marjorie's home and Larry's home. Larry wasn't home, but inside they found a lot of photos of Marjorie and Noah. They also found steroids, which Larry used to upkeep his physique at the gym. Officers noticed in Marjorie's garage that the floor had freshly been epoxied. The walls were all repaired and freshly painted as well. The windows were covered with cardboard so people couldn't see inside. There was also an exact Rubbermaid bin, just like the one found in the desert. On the shelves were all of the cleaning supplies that Marjorie had purchased days after Jay went missing. However, the mops were missing. Inside Marjorie's purse was Jay's checkbook and credit cards, which he should have had with him if he was away on business. In Marjorie's closet were 4 bags of white powder, later identified as meth. In the warehouse, way on the top shelf, police would also find an opened package of skilled jigsaw blades with 2 blades missing. I should mention that the police bought the same package of blades to test out which ones were best to cut up a body, and it was the 2 missing blades that were proven to be the best and would cut a body, quote, like butter, end quote. At this point, Jay's bank accounts were being shut down, and this infuriated Marjorie. Even though she'd been taking $500 cash out of his account daily, she was still insistent she needed to access his money. Larry was detained, and he was asked to give his DNA. Once he left the station, he ended the relationship with Marjorie. Now, most of the evidence in this case was circumstantial, even though it mainly points to Marjorie. And that's tough, because to prove it was in fact Marjorie who committed this crime, it has to be proven without a reasonable doubt. Some things brought forward was Jay's cell phone records. Remember all the calls to people during his disappearance? They were all made in or nearby the Orbin home, as well as Larry's home. His voicemail was periodically checked, and those calls too were made at or nearby the Orbin home. Even more interesting was that when Marjorie made calls from Jay's phone, she typically called someone from her own phone right after. So all the calls were pinging on the same tower at the same time. Another thing that implicated Marjorie was the small fibers found on the duct tape used on the totes. The fibers were said to be from the Ford Bronco. There was also 4 hairs on the duct tape as well, 2 of those being chemically bleached, just like Marjorie's. Unfortunately, the hairs were not tested for DNA because the Phoenix laboratory findings contradicted the FBI's findings, so nobody proceeded with testing. Now, Marjorie did wear hair extensions made from human hair, but it was too late to test for that. They also didn't bother testing the other 2 hairs, which may have ended up being Larry or another person who helped Marjorie. Now, remember when we discussed how possessive Marjorie was? She never allowed sleepovers at other homes, except for September 16th. She randomly called a neighbor and asked if Noah could spend the night. This was a school night as well, which the neighbor thought was really odd. It was a last-minute request, and the neighbor said yes. Marjorie didn't elaborate much on where she was going, though, other than saying she was meeting up with some friends. Now, even though Marjorie's super possessive, she strangely didn't call or check up on Noah at all. The following morning, when the neighbor was getting the boys ready for school, she realized Marjorie forgot to pack a shirt. So they swung by before school, and Marjorie seemed really agitated and annoyed. The smoking gun in the case was the purchase Marjorie made at Lowe's Home Improvement. The UPC code matched the exact location that she was seen on video purchasing blue tubs, identical to the blue tub Jay's torso was found in. She had actually bought two. The second tub was never located, and the rest of Jay's body was also never located, so it's still presumably out there somewhere. Larry has always maintained his innocence. He swears up and down he had nothing to do with Jay's murder. It does seem a little unbelievable that Marjorie did it alone. She didn't own a big enough freezer to put Jay into. She also might have had a hard time lifting him or putting the tub in and out of the Bronco. But Larry was never charged or convicted in anything to do with this case. Jake Jr. would raise Noah, and the weirdest thing happened while living with them. Noah, the blonde boy who they knew and loved, started to grow roots. His hair was actually brown. Marjorie had been lightening his hair since he was a baby, so it could be more like hers instead of Jay's. Now, Marjorie has always had an excuse for everything. She thinks the cops planted the car keys that were found with Jay's torso. She thought people were lying to make her look badly. Her spending copious amounts of money after Jay's disappearance was a misunderstanding. Jay had apparently instructed her to make large purchases and withdraw cash if anything were to happen to him, so she was just doing as he wished. In the end, Marjorie had drained more than $200,000 from his accounts. While in jail, she continued to lie about who she was. She admitted that she was a stripper with celebrity friends like Michael J. Peter, but she also said she was a pilot. She told another inmate that she was a journalist and was only in jail to write a story about prison. Allegedly, she also confessed to other inmates, going into details on how she had to cut Jay up into pieces because he was too fat and heavy. Then, a few months before her trial started, she changed her story again. She finally wanted to talk. She now blamed Larry for everything. She went on to say that Jay came home early and unexpectedly on his birthday. It was Larry who confronted Jay in the garage and shot him. He then threatened Marjorie's life if she ever told anyone. It was Larry who dismembered Jay and hid him in the desert. Now again, Larry was never charged as there was no evidence to prove that he was involved. Chances are he was, but he was given immunity. On September 14th, Marjorie was found guilty and was given life in prison. The death penalty was on the table, but her life was spared for Noah. Nobody wanted to take away both of his parents. Marjorie spoke out during her parole eligibility hearing, and she basically said there was no point in saying anything because a group of people who were convinced of something that was not true put her in jail. All she wanted to do was move forward so she could appeal her sentence. Marjorie would also say that Jay wasn't supposed to die. She still claims that she woke up with a sore throat and thought they were coming down with strep, so she told Jay to hold off in rushing coming home. As the day progressed, Noah seemed fine, but she still had already decided that she was going to keep him home from school the following day just in case. Then, as she was tucking Noah into bed that night, she heard gunshots. She claimed she didn't even know Larry was there. He ran into the home yelling, "It was an accident." Apparently, Larry had come over to visit and Jay came home at the exact same time. They got into a fight in the garage and, quote, "a gun went off," end quote. She presumed it was the gun Jerry carried in his briefcase and it was all an accident. She also claims she never saw Jay's body. And I won't get into too much more details of her side of the story because I feel like it's laced with lies and fabrications of the truth. She wants to take the blame off her and put it on someone else, which is what she's done her entire life. It's not her fault she had to turn to stripping. It's not her fault that she got married 7 times. It's not her fault that she used Jay to have a child. It's not her fault that Jay is dead. She has a history of lying about absolutely everything in her life. Who her family is, the celebrities she knows, her occupations, everything. She's claimed that every single person who testified against her is wrong. She even blames her eyebrows for the reason why people make assumptions about who she is. She is completely delusional. She has, of course, appealed her sentence and conviction, which has been denied multiple times. She will remain behind bars for the rest of her life. My thoughts? If you read the book Dancing with Death, it goes into way more detail about Marjorie and a bunch of other illegal things she did, even while behind bars. Way too much to get in here today. There is also more to her side of the story, but like I said, I feel like it was riddled with lies. She was a compulsive liar and narcissist. I don't think we should be believing what she's saying. It seems to me that she doesn't care about anybody else but herself. If her and Jay hadn't had Noah, she would have left him, but it was Noah that forced her to stick around. She had no job, she was old, no longer stripper material, she had nothing. Jay's money was the only thing she wanted, and the only way to get that was for him to be dead. What do you think? Did Larry help Marjorie? Did Marjorie do this on her own? Do you believe any of her excuses? That's it for today. Thanks again for joining me here at Felony Spectator. Please hit subscribe to support my channel. We will see you again soon.